one of the gifts, and I think it's hard to talk about the silver lining around COVID because there was so much devastation to so many communities, but it is that we are having conversations that we probably would never be able to have before. Our guests today are joining us from Argentina, which, I think just 3 years ago, the idea that we would be able to have this conversation in a virtual way and the way that we are now is pretty remarkable. And we're also having this really important conversation about the spread of misinformation. I think we know that misinformation, disinformation is a public safety and consumer protection issue that concerns us all. Again, I think COVID has brought this all to the forefront of our conversations. And so I'd like to just really thank Clara and Laura for joining us this morning for this conversation. There are many communities to talk to, and both Clara and Laura are committed to the conversation with the Hispanic community, and the work that they are doing is just absolutely remarkable when you think of the trusted messenger. And so I'd like to start this conversation where I always like to start conversations, is just learning about the passion that drives the work that you do. So Laura, I'm going to start with you. You both are journalists, and so it's interesting that you find yourself where you are today, but what got you to this? What was your passion surrounding the work of a journalist?
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell you more about our passion and also about our impact with this pilot project that is Factchequeado, and we launched it almost a year ago. The reason why I started being a journalist is because I always have more questions than answers, and I think a good journalist is someone that can make good questions and not necessarily have the truth or always the reason. My approach as journalists always include listen to what are the concerns and the necessary and the questions from the audiences, from the different audiences, the different ages, the different groups, the different ethnics. And part of the reason why we launched Factchequeado, I'm going to let Clara, because really the idea is not mine, is Clara, co-founder in Maldita idea, and then I'm going to let her explain more about that. But the reason why I become a journalist is because I'm always asking more and wanting to know more. And I think this profession gives me the chance in lots of cases to speak with people like you, for example, that know much more than me about diseases, medicine, health system, etc. And then I'm always looking for that.
Great, always looking for answers and listening. I love that. Clara, what was your compulsion to be a journalist?
So I think that when I was small, I come from a rather privileged background for a country like Spain, and my feeling was that education and education equality was super important to understand the world and to be able to actually drive yourself throughout the world. And I always thought about becoming a teacher, but I have a little of ambition within myself probably, and I thought that by becoming a journalist, I was able to educate a much broader public than just being a teacher. So I think that's the kind of drive that made me become a journalist. I was a TV journalist for 10 years, and then I drifted to fact-checking. I think out of what Laura was saying, that idea of listening to what audiences need. Journalism in general tends to be very much top to bottom, and the way fact-checking considers itself and looks at its communities and its communities' issues has a lot to do with being bottom to top, to listening to what concerns people and then trying to find answers. And sometimes those concerns might not be the Pulitzer Prize questions, but they are the questions that people have and that people need answered so that they can make informed decisions.
So Laura said it was your idea, Factchequeado was your idea. And there's always a moment that changes everything for you. So why Factchequeado, and why you and Laura are the right people to do this work?
So I think that before the pandemic in 2019, both Laura and I were seeing how political disinformation was becoming much more present and much more important, and polarization was becoming much more important in our countries. And we also saw what was happening in the US around polarization, and how Spanish-speaking communities in the US did not have a reference fact checker to go to. They were not being attended by the American fact checkers because they wrote in English, spoke in English, and tried to address English-speaking concerns, to put it that way. So I called Laura and I told her, hey, maybe the learnings that Maldita had in Spain and Chequeado had in Argentina could be valuable for Spanish-speaking communities in the US. So Factchequeado has over 12 years, Maldita has over 6 years. We've made so many mistakes throughout our time. It took us quite a long time to actually understand Spanish-speaking audiences and how this information affected them, and which were the best strategies to try to combat it and to try to get those communities informed. So I asked her, why don't we try to launch something in the US? And it was the mid of the Argentinian election in 2019. And she was like, I can't do this right now. Like, I'm not able to join your party. Then the pandemic came, and everyone had...
Sorry, and that was a mistake from the previous years, not to say no in the right moment.
Right.
And then I was happy to say no at that moment, because 3 months after the pandemic came.
So then the pandemic came, and we saw how disinformation being fabricated for Spanish-speaking audiences in the US reached our countries and our regions. And we saw how disinformation fabricated around the pandemic in Spanish in Europe went to South America, and how that became what we call the Silk Road of Spanish misinformation, which drives all around the 3 continents. And once the pandemic was not over, but started to be a bit more manageable on disinformation issues, we thought, hey, no one's done this yet. It's been 2 years. No one is addressing Spanish disinformation in the US. Let's do it now. And that's when we launched Factchequeado a year ago as a pilot project. And we got the support from the ABIM Foundation. And here we are now.
Well, you know, I have to tell you that what you're saying about the 3 continents, it seems like the work is really big. You know, the community is not monolithic. So what is your approach to this work, and how do you prioritize where you need to be, where your help is most needed?
Yeah, I can go to that. The part of the strategy and the learnings from our experience, not just in Spain and Argentina, but also Chequeado since 2014, create a network that is called LatamChequea, that include 35 organizations in 18 countries in the region. And in lots of cases, we work together, because disinformation perhaps change the name of a politician or the name of a doctor or researcher, but in some cases, the narrative is exactly the same. And it's not necessarily efficient to do the same work in different organizations. It's not that we have a lot of money to do quality journalism around the world, then we have to invest each pen that we receive in the best way that we can to reach the people that need more disinformation or quality journalism. And then what we do in our regions and now in the United States is to create a network. With Factchequeado, we have already 41 media partners in 16 states that help us to reach the people that we think need us more. And this is not, as Clara said, just that we produce content and we share it with them and they publish it. Also, we have what we call our cafecito meeting every Thursday. That is a 1-hour newsroom meeting that is open to all our partners to bring us issues and topics and questions that they receive from Kentucky, that we have a partner with just one journalist, or from Univision in Florida, that we have them as partner and can bring perhaps the questions that they receive in Florida or WhatsApp. I think perhaps Clara also can tell you more about the importance of WhatsApp for our communities and how we deal with that in our countries, and now we are doing the same, replicating the US.
So I forgot to mention that, Clara, you're actually in Spain. So Laura is in Argentina, you're in Spain. So I just wanted to clarify that. And we're going to get to more about WhatsApp, because that is an essential part of how you communicate with the Hispanic community, the Latina community throughout the three continents that you spoke to. But tell me more about the collaborative. Did people jump in with both feet? Were people reticent to be helpful? What was the driving force around people saying, count me in, I want to join this conversation?
So I think we look at allies in different ways. So we have these media partners that enable us to understand what their communities are asking and which are their concerns, and that replicate our work in their outlets so that it reaches their communities and they find us useful in that way. We have a second kind of allies that are more institutional allies that need to understand how this information thrives in Spanish-speaking communities because it affects the work they do, or because it affects the mission they have. For example, let's take the Brennan Center in Espanol, which does a lot of studies around democracy and how this information affects voters and decision-making. And then there's a third part of that in the way we understand the fight against disinformation can be driven, which has to do with communicating with your audiences and getting their questions. And that is where WhatsApp comes in. So there's a lot of people out there that have questions, that have things that they need answers to. It's either fact checks or simply context on some issues, right? Like easy explanations that can be easily understood by someone that does not necessarily have a lot of time to spend in reading a long article, or does not necessarily have the in-depth knowledge that is needed to read, for example, a scientific article. What we do is we try to engage with them in two ways. One is we ask them, ask us the question and we'll give you an answer that can enable you to make an informed decision. And secondly, we ask them to take us back to their communities. So whenever they find a piece of disinformation and they send it to us and they get a fact check straight away, they go to their communities and whoever shared it with them will tell them, hey, you shared this piece of disinformation with me the other day. You need to know that this is false because of this and this. And that way, and there are studies that have already proven that that is the best way of reaching audiences that interact and inform themselves a lot on closed media closed social platforms like WhatsApp, which is what we see in the Latino communities. This is, and I think it makes sense to make a pause here to understand that Spanish-speaking communities don't necessarily use WhatsApp only to communicate with a friend and tell them, hey, I'm running late today. You're gonna have to wait for me at the cafe. They use it in many other ways to communicate with the families back home, to get information on political issues, social issues, because they exchange a lot of information through that. And what we see over and over again through research is that around 30% of Spanish-speaking countries' population say that they get informed through WhatsApp, which is not only consuming relationships with their families and friends, but also consuming information through WhatsApp. WhatsApp is part of their information diet in that sense.
And there are 2 points that are important on that, and I think perhaps also can apply in to doctors or something like that, is that in that spaces, in the WhatsApp groups, people trust because or they are family, or they are friends, or they are colleagues, or they are parents from school or something like that. Then part of the mission and the goal for this first year of Factchequeado is to build a community that can allow us to identify people that other people in their different cities can trust on
Mhm.
to help us to spread the word. And we have some comments or questions there that perhaps can help us. It's super important that we realize that these people are never going to read an abstract from a paper in lots of cases, because perhaps they spend 10 hours working outside their home, and they're going to be getting their news when they are traveling back home or in the morning before going with their children to school. Then what we need to do is not just create an evidence-based article with obvious good sources, super quality information, but also to work and experiment on different formats can allow us to reach that people and be someone that makes their life easier, help them. And then when I started being journalist 25 years ago, a good journalist was someone that reached the proper or the good sources and write a good piece, and a good piece article, correct, to explain a complex issue in a simple way.
Mhm.
Today, that's not enough to say that something is good journalism,
Mhm.
because you need to reach the people that need that information.
Right.
And obviously that makes us a lot of challenge in terms of budget, because it's more expensive not just to have the article, but also you need a video, or you need audios for the senior people in WhatsApp, or you need to create a graphic or an infographic to share by WhatsApp, because all the research shows us that content that is visual can be more shareable, and we want our community to make bigger and grow, and then we need to give them material to share that content in a easy way.
So
And that's part of what we are doing.
yeah, in terms of the community, the Latino community, is it more susceptible, or is it just making sure that you have the right voices in conversation with the community? Clara?
What do you mean when it is more susceptible to disinformation?
Right, is the Latino community more susceptible than other communities, or is it just making sure you have the right messenger delivering the information?
I would say that it depends a lot on the topic and on the Latino community itself. And we were saying how there are several Latino communities and they engage in different ways in that sense. I think out of our experience, what we see is that, for example, let's take health issues. One of the issues that Latino communities have is access to healthcare. And that kind of burdens, like access to healthcare, means that they rely on other health methods that are not necessarily scientifically based. So, for example, one of the topics that we see over and over again are house remedies to cure certain diseases. It has to do with them being more susceptible, not necessarily to disinformation around health, but also to other kind of issues that do not enable them to make specific choices at specific points.
There's some research that shows that Latinos living in the States are more susceptible than others. Part of the hypothesis is that they don't necessarily trust on the media that an average American trusts. And then they don't necessarily consume it, the New York Times or the Washington Post, in the way that the English-speaking educated citizens do. And then obviously we need to create media that give these groups quality journalists, but being in the places where these communities are getting informed. And that's why part of our goal is we need to create this community in WhatsApp, and we need all of you that have patients that are bilingual or Spanish speaking to help us to spread the word. And we are trying to do the same with schools that have in some neighbors more Latino communities speaking, it's not that we can't say, and there are not research that show that Latinos are all around the world more open to share content that is not quality content. In the States, that in general, we talk about Latinos as a group, but all of us know that they are not necessarily a group.
Right.
They're completely different. The second generation that went to school in English from their grandparents that perhaps can't read English. They are completely different. The Mexican living in the borders or in Texas than the Puerto Rican living in New York. Or then we need to take that into account. And the part of the solution is always, before trying to explain them how the world is, listen about why they believe on that. And I think that's something that applies also to doctors.
Yeah.
If you have a patient that is not necessarily taking the medicine, not because they can't buy it, but because they don't trust on pharma companies or something like that, it is useful to give them an answer that can be precise related to their thoughts. It's not that we have commodities that can help us. Okay, I trust on vaccines, but there are people that don't trust due to different reasons. Then,
and so how do you address the vaccine question? I mean, that, you know, as the virus grew, that was a big concern in Black and brown communities here in the States. So the vaccine issue was big even before COVID, and now it's just gotten worse. How do you address the vaccination question? And either one of you can take that question.
So I would say that there are different strategies that we follow. One is we've done a lot of explanatory articles on what is a vaccine, how it works, how does it protect you. Secondly, we've tried to explain a lot how we came around the COVID vaccines, which is like the eternal questions. It was done very quickly. They didn't try it out. So we give a lot of explanations around that. Then we see a lot of disinformation on reports on diseases or issues that people falsely relate to the vaccine. So we do a lot of explanatory articles on, even though they've reported this and it was a vaccinated person, you cannot make the assumption that this happened because of this. So we, like, explaining basic scientific method is part of what we need to do. And then we do a lot of straightforward fact checking on a lot of the content that we see related to the vaccine. But I think there are two key things on this, because you will tell me, okay, but American fact checkers have done this around vaccination for a very long time. I think there are two things that we do that are important, or three. One is we write our article in a plain tone and voice. So we're not super fancy speaking. We try to write our articles in the same way we would tell a story to someone at a bar. So if I'm trying to explain vaccination to a friend, that's the way I will write the article so that it reaches the people I'm seeking to reach. We're not condescending. We understand that the person on the other side might know something about vaccines that I don't, or that our reporters don't necessarily know, or they might think that they know something that we don't necessarily know. So we do that story of trying to listen to what their concerns are and bringing them back. And third, and Laura was saying that we go to where people are. We try to meet people where they consume their news, and that might be WhatsApp, or it might be Instagram, or it might be TikTok. And we're not scared of, like, we don't dance for now, but we're okay with doing TikTok videos. And we understand that that's the way of reaching those audiences. And when we're there are some strategies that we've put in place that we've learned over the years that have to do with, if misinformers are very good at reaching communities and convincing them, you might want to use the same tools they use to try to convince them of your own good quality information. So that idea of making TikTok videos, or of making audios that might reach people closer and that might humanize information more are much more useful than just writing a 2,000-word article that might be super well referenced. But our work is still super well referenced and very well scientifically based, but you can consume it in 2 minutes and get the facts straight.
The one thing that I took away from our earlier conversation and meeting you at the forum last year as well is that both of you are very upfront about failures along the way and lessons learned. And, not everybody is willing to share that, yeah, there were a few mistakes along the way. Can you share with our guest today, what you would do differently in starting this effort, and what were the things what were the failures that were helpful in getting you to where you are today?
I can start because we start 12 years ago, then perhaps I have more. No, one of the things that we change during the years is that we try to follow narratives and create explainers, and not just the debunk piece, each by each piece, because that allowed us in the article or in the explainer to teach our audience that they're going to see again and again and again more or less the same content in a different way, but they should be aware, or we should increase their awareness related to this going to be there in your cell phone or in your computer. Then you should have more tools to do that. And then if we don't do that, we are always late in a way. And the other thing that we learn is at the beginning as journalists, in general journalists, and you know that Pamela and doctors in lots of cases suffer that, are looking for bad news or the things that are not necessarily the ordinary things. When things go good or good correctly, they're not necessarily a front page article. Then when we start doing fact checking, we didn't realize that the true, or say that some statement from a politician or from a social leader is a true statement, has the value that academic research showed us 5 years ago. And the reason why we need to do that is because each time that we publish that something is false, someone in the audience hates us a bit because we explained them that they were wrong. And no one likes that.
Right.
Then when we publish that something is true, and perhaps is the leader they vote in the election before, or the I don't know, the businessmen that they, or women they were loving for years, or the singer, or I don't know, they said, okay, I love this organization because you give me the reason.
Right.
Then that is another lesson that we learn is we need to have more research and use the research to be, or to develop better strategy to approach this phenomenon that is not a phenomenon that we're going to solve with journalists, is a phenomenon that we're going to help to address in a better way, and to help with other strategies that include regulation strategy, include education, curricula at schools, include networks or more transparency in the big techs and the way we consume information. And there's a lot of strategy that came together, and it's not that we're going to have a secret bullet that tomorrow gonna give us the solution for this information. And that is something that we listen a lot is, okay, tell me what can I do? You can solve it. It's
right. You spoke about, people are looking for bad news. Like if you look at the news any night, you started with house fires, accidents, police activity. But there's a lot of bad news out there. So it's not a shortage of stuff to write about. Why would someone intentionally want to mislead a community? What is the why behind that? And I'm open to either one of you grabbing that. Clara, why don't you start?
So we typically say that there are three main reasons. One has to do with ideology, so politics, trying to make someone think some way because it might be beneficial ideologically. The second one has to do with money. There's a lot of people making money out of disinformation on a general basis, and we see it with false remedies for cures, for example, in the health system. And the third one is the most complicated one. We tend to say that it's because it's human nature, because trying to push forward a story and see how far it can get and how much you can fool someone is also part of how the internet works and how humans interact with the internet.
Do you feel like, because you spoke to polarization, are there concerns that you have about the work that you do? We spoke to someone who was dealing with the misinformation in that disinformation area, and they were concerned, for example, by talking about hashtag vaccination or anything, because people who are doing this, I don't know if you could say it's easily the good or bad guys, but if you put hashtag flu vaccination, then you're going to get clobbered by the folks who disagree with you on different issues. So in terms of those moments, can you share with us what your moments have been like in the work that you're doing?
So I think that after the pandemic, disinformer communities have become very well organized. I don't think that was the case, at least not in our regions before the pandemic, but clearly the pandemic gave us a lot of time at home and also boosted those communities highly, and they became much better organized than before and also interconnected. So there's a case of a Spanish doctor that based a whole conspiracy theory on a German conspiracy theory. She became popular in Spain. She started creating a group that is called Médicos por la Verdad, Doctors for the Truth. And then that group went to South America and to the Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, and it became huge. They started making a lot of money and creating a very big community, and we had never seen that before. So I think, at least like the experience I have is that we see how those groups are much better organized and are much better at harassing journalists and people trying to share good information. So there are some things that we've done lately, which is we sometimes close comments on Twitter, because if imagine you put out a tweet on a fact check and all the answers you get below it are bad comments saying that you're lying, saying that you're paid by the government, saying whatever you can imagine. That also makes a lot of, it's bad for your trust, right? You're trying to build trust, and someone that consumes you and that trusts you starts seeing a lot of bad comments. So sometimes we directly close comments. It happens the same on the Factchequeado website. There are no comments because we understand that that is a way of getting attacked. And what we try is to create safe spaces to be able to talk to our communities. So for example, that idea of El Cafecito with the media that we take, or trying to enter the communities that they already have created that might do a webinar that we can join and try to explain some things around fact checking and disinformation issues, feel more comfortable, because we understand that this is a war against disinformation, and we are under attack every day, every time.
And also we learned a lot in the last years related to that, related to mental health of our teams, the people that are all the time following and monitoring and trying to detect these narratives can do it every day.
Right.
Then
Trying to
we
disperse the
then we change our system of monitoring. At the beginning we had the two people doing it, and now it's just 1 day a week for each one, and then it's not that it's suffer, but at least we are taking a bit more care about our team.
That's so important, making sure that you protect the people who are dealing with this every day, because you do, several times you will have a conversation with my team. Am I crazy? Or, so there's a lot of those moments. Nick, I want to say, I hear some background noise. If there's any chance that you could mute where that is coming from, that would be great. And Jamie, I noticed that there's a lot of questions. And so I'd really like to get to the questions that other folks have. So why don't we open that up to some of the questions for Laura and Clara?
Yeah, there are a lot of really great questions. Laura shared earlier in the conversation the format that people best receive information in, but one of the questions asked, for people who have been misinformed and don't want to get vaccinated, for example, how do you present information to undo that misinformation that they've already received?
It's not an easy question, and it will depend a lot on the case, but I think that answering, so that idea of listening to what are that person concerns and trying to work around them by understanding why they're concerned about it. So one of the things that we've done over the years is a lot of consulting with psychologists and trying to understand how actually this information is perceived by that people that have like a strong belief on something. And that most of the time comes out of not having understood well something, or out of fear. And those kinds of feelings can actually be debunked if you want to see it that way, but you need to understand exactly what is that it's affecting them to try to undo them.
And another strategy that we use, and I think, Pamela, the noise is from my office, sorry for that, for everyone, is that we need to be really transparent about what we know and about what we don't know. Part of the mistake that we saw a lot during the pandemic in some governments or the CDC perhaps or other institutions is that they present the evidence that they were not necessarily the final evidence as a statement that it was the final one. And learning from that, but always from other type of articles that we write in the past, we always repeat that we present to our audience the better evidence that we have the chance to achieve in that moment.
Right.
Always being open to have someone in the community to tell us, okay, but there's something here that you didn't include. And we are open to that conversation. And obviously, if we made a mistake, we have a transparent policy explaining our audience that we did a mistake. We do it. It's not that we always have mistakes, but our methodology includes these type of things as part of our work.
And of course, we deal with the whole misinformation stuff where everything is, in the United States, we have this term called Monday morning quarterbacking. So you have a history of people bringing up facts, and those facts have changed, but people forget where we were 2.5 years ago, where people were just, the body bags were lined up and people were going to ICU and never coming back out again. And people were making statements, but I think you're right. I say what you know, but also, things may change. And so I think that makes it more difficult in this war against misinformation. And I hate that I use that term war, but it does seem like that sometimes. I know it seems like that to me sometimes. So thank you, Laura. And Jamie, is there another question?
Yeah, there's quite a few. The next one is from Heather, and it received a couple thumbs up from others in the audience. She asked, are there differences between Spanish health misinformation and English health misinformation? Could you share more about the differences if there are? Laura,
I can go.
No, I can go. I have a lot of noise back. Then if it is a problem for you to listen, just we move to Clara. We see a lot of difference between English speaking and Spanish speaking communities in other areas that in general are related with economic crisis, inflation, and things that these communities perhaps live in their native or work country, and then when they move, they don't necessarily expect that they're gonna have different answers that the answer from the government, for example. And we were discussing today about the Silicon Valley Bank and the presentation from President Biden related to that, and the difference between the answers that part of our community receive in the same situation with I don't know, in Argentina or Ecuador or other countries, and having the background and knowing what are the characteristics of the different groups in the States make us create in some cases, content or articles that can address that fears, because we know that this information is related to emotions, and in lots of cases, fear, it's a really big reason of why people share the content. In terms of health disinformation, last year, in general, we saw more or less the same. The anti-vaccines are not equal, but we have the problems with, I don't know, Bill Gates, ADN, changes with the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. We have the all the side effects related to fertility, etc. And they are the same or almost the same in Spanish and English. Perhaps the most different one that we saw is after the Supreme Court decided to go back with the abortion, with Roe versus Wade, we detect in Spanish lots of content that we saw in the past in the Latin America abortion discussion in the Congress. And perhaps they were content created for Catholic churches or groups that were pro-family groups. That in TikTok, we saw some videos really viral related to natural ways to do an abortion that obviously they fear or create us concern about us, because we saw exactly the same that some years ago we saw or in Colombia or in Argentina or in Chile or other places.
I think it takes us back to that idea of a lot of home remedies for unequal access to healthcare and that sort of thing. For example, with formula, we saw a lot of this information on substitutes of formula that are obviously not working. I think those kinds of things that have to do also with social economics and background of Latino communities are part of the differences between the disinformation perceived in English
and related to that, and that's perhaps also useful for you as doctors, is in people coming from some of the Latin America countries have a super open healthcare system that give us much more access than the access that these people have in the US. Then perhaps also there's something to deal with trust on that, because they are not necessarily trusting on the professional, but the system is not necessary as I can't find exactly the word, but they are not welcoming them in the same way that their healthcare system in their own countries at least say they welcome them.
Jamie, any other questions? I know I see them piling, so
yes. What recommendations do you have for researchers that want to consult fact-checking websites like Factchequeado for their work, and how can those researchers determine the quality that's being presented?
So both Maldita and Chequeado and Factchequeado in the near future hopefully belong to what it's called the International Fact-Checking Network. which is a network that was created in 2014 to actually uphold the standards of fact-checking so that we could make a difference between who does quality fact-checking and quality journalism and who might be portraying itself as a fact-checker, but is not. So those organizations belonging to the International Fact-Checking Network, the IFCN, which is based at the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida, undergo an independent assessment every year on whether they are fulfilling the standards of fact-checking that have to do with transparency, with methodology, with honest corrections, with neutrality and non-partisanship and things like that.
Great.
A few more questions. Some of the fear behind the distrust of healthcare and of the pharma industry is a history that we've seen across the country, including on the island of Puerto Rico, where people have a history of being lied to and in some aspects used as experiments. How can we assist in acknowledging and allaying those fears without negating the past and addressing the harms that were caused?
I'm pretty sure you guys are in a better position than us to answer that. What we see out of the trust rates in Spanish-speaking countries on healthcare systems, as Laura said, is pretty high in general in Spanish communities because of the public healthcare systems that we've had in our countries. There might be specific cases, of course, like Puerto Rico, but my gut feeling to tell you is coming to the same thing as with the other questions, which is listen to those people. And I know that you don't necessarily have the time to have long conversations with your patients, but I think that changing that idea of patients come to the doctor and the doctor is the one that's doing the speaking because he's the authorized voice, and actually stopping for a minute and listening to what their concerns are and trying to address them directly is much more useful than just speaking out on how those concerns might look, because they might look very different for every person that comes in.
Thank you, Clara. And do you think that the work that Factchequeado is doing can be replicated in the US for other minority populations?
Yeah, not perhaps in this group, but we imagine there's similar problems with the diaspora coming from India or the diaspora coming from other countries. We have a huge problem in the big text with the disinformation that is not the English disinformation, because they don't invest the same budget on follow the trends in languages different than English. And then we always repeat that we need sources to do better research to understand better the problem outside the US, UK, and some European countries, when we have not a lot of research, but much more than what we have outside. And yeah, we always repeat also that this is not a work or this is not a strategy that can work from 1 week to the other. To build the community and to build trust and to have the chance to use in a way this community to help us to be not just in the WhatsApp of the family, but also in a Sunday conversation or in a party, or that is something that takes time. And in the meanwhile, we need to continue doing journalists, perhaps not necessarily showing the same impact that we're going to show after 10 years. That's why also we are super thankful with ABIM Foundation, because you give us this prize last year to help us do this in our first stages.
I just had a quick question. Sorry, Jamie, but I want to kind of ask this question. It looks like you guys are operating in newsrooms. Just because of all the activity behind you. So I understand that your communications is with the different communities. how do you how do you talk to newsrooms about, because journalists are susceptible to bad information as well, right? So is there work there, you know, with the newsrooms around information just generally?
So one of the things we do with the newsrooms that become allies, but also with others that don't necessarily become allies, is we do a lot of training. In general terms, mature fact-checking organizations will most likely have a newsroom that is creating journalistic pieces in different formats and an education stream that has understood which are the problems that might come up when trying to teach media literacy to general public, but also to specific parties. So we've, both Laura and I and our organizations have interacted with journalists for a very long time and have a track record for training journalists in understanding that, for example, a good headline does not make a good information piece. It's trying to reach your audience and giving them all the information that is necessary. So one of the things we do with those new allies that come on board is we offer them free training on understanding the disinformation ecosystem, understanding how disinformation might be affecting their communities, and actually just doing fact checking at the end of the day so that they start fact checking their own news as well.
And some lessons learned. During last year, we give trainings for at least 200 journalists in the States. Part of the challenge that we have in Factchequeado is that there are not necessarily a lot of bilingual journalists that have the chance to do fact checking. And part of our goal is also to have better journalists or better professionals doing the work. That's why we partner also with universities. We have free courses for university from San Diego in California to UNI in New York or others. And we do that trainings as part of our goal. And we know that journalists are skeptical, and we know that journalists don't necessarily like other journalists to tell them how to do things.
Right.
But this is a particular moment, because journalists know that disinformers in lots of cases are winning. Then this gives us a window of opportunity to sit with them and say, okay, it's not that we're gonna tell you how to do things. I'm just going to tell you what I learned being during 12 years, just making or investing my time to follow this type of content. And then these are some lessons.
Right.
And one of that lessons include, for example, if you're gonna reproduce the content of a disinformer, don't use colors, use black and white. And that can, and this isn't something that I didn't invent one day when I wake up, is something that came from a research. And then trying to also evidence-base our strategy or interventions is part of what we are doing.
I have to say that we have 2 minutes. We're up on the hour. The questions that are coming in are so excellent. I wish we had more time to get to these questions, because it's just the two of you, the work that you're doing, the success that you're garnering, the partnerships that you've built are just amazing. And we are so glad as the foundation at ABIM to support the work that you're doing, and just to say thank you for all of your efforts. And you guys are just incredible. You're just inspirational, I think is the right word in this moment. Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you.
Sorry, we have a request for everyone in the audience. We need you at least for 2 things that can help us a lot. And I'm not going to take more than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is we need all of you as sources. If we are experts in something and you are open to answer our request when a new paper just launched and a newspaper put in a front page something that the paper is not necessarily concluding, we need you and we need your expertise. And the other is, if we have patients that are bilingual, we need you to help us to share the WhatsApp group. Sorry for
No, that's wonderful, Laura.
Let me reround that. I left our contact email there. So if any of you are willing to collaborate and become sources for the information that we do, that'll be great. Just shoot us an email with your expertise and we'll get in contact. And remember that this is not all on you. We need at least 2, preferable 3 sources to confirm a story. So we're not going to put all the weight on your shoulders.